Om Narayana Namaskrityam Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Mudirayet Shrinvatam Swakata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana Hridayanto Stiya Bhadrani Vidunoti Suhritsatam Nashta Prayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naistiki. Hare Krishna. So, we are continuing with our discussion of the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. We concluded chapter 12 2 sessions back. Then we had Sri Janmashtami celebrations, and as a consequence, we are now continuing and we are going to start with chapter 13. Chapter 13 has a broad theme, and the broad theme has to do with the topic of being able to allocate exclusive time to the process of devotional service. In other words, we all have different occupations. We all have identities which are quite distinct from the identity of being a servant of Krishna. And the whole process of Krishna consciousness leads us towards better understanding and completely understanding our sambandha with Krishna. What is our sambandha? What is our specific relationship with Krishna? And when I say specific relationship, we are referring to the specific relationship of between us and Krishna in the 4 mellows which Mahaprabhu spoke of. So the mellow of servitude, dasya, the mellow of sakya, friendship, the mellow of vatsalya, which is parental love towards the Lord, and then the mellow of madhurya, which is the love and the interaction and the rasa between the Lord and his consort and her friends and her servants, etc. So one of these 4 broad categories is the real sambandha that we can have with Krishna. And that is our real sambandha in all of our existence. The true purpose of any spiritual journey is for us to be able to unfold this sambandha. What is the specific relationship I have with the Lord? And once the relationship is known, the identity is established. And when the identity is established, then dharma is understood. You cannot understand duty without first establishing firm identities. If you do not know who you are in terms of a certain object, a certain organizational structure, what is the chance that you would know what duties you could perform within that organization, or what kind of interaction would you have with people in an organization if you did not know what your role was, what your identity was? Are you supposed to be in a certain X, Y, Z role? Are you supposed to be doing something else? If you are not familiar with what your identity is, even in the normal mundane sense of organizational dynamics, then you will have a crisis in being able to provide any kind of output which is reasonable. There's going to be a challenge in terms of any kind of output because we would not know what our duties are. So if there are going to be challenges in this very temporal, very temporary existence, if there are going to be challenges which are related to the body because we don't really understand what our duties are, then what to say of eternal life? How could we function in eternal life, and how could we understand eternal duty, which is real dharma? Real dharma is understanding who we are in relationship to Krishna and then understanding the duties that come through that relationship. Every relationship has associated duties. There are expectations. So how would we possibly be efficient if we did not know our relationship in the first place? So the first objective and the first leg of any spiritual process is to understand our relationship with the Supreme. When we understand the relationship with the Supreme, then the chances are we would eventually unfold and come to the platform of being able to be very spiritually efficient. We will know exactly what we are meant to do in that relationship. And then when we know what we are meant to do in that relationship and spiritual efficiency sets in, we would know how to use our time while we are in this body. Our time in this body is being pulled and managed in different directions. All we have is time. All we have is time. All we have are sunrises, sunsets. Yeah? All we have is that. We are basically going from one sunrise to a sunrise, another sunrise. It's 24 hours, is one sunrise to another sunrise. This is all we have. In this 24 hours, we basically need to understand what is our relationship with Krishna, and then we need to be able to establish duty in that relationship. The more spiritually efficient we become, we will know how to manage these 24 hours. We will know how to not waste it away on other identities which are extraordinarily temporary. We will know exactly what to do with time. And if you know what to do with time, you have conquered time. You really have conquered time. Because when you establish an eternal relationship, you literally have conquered the time factor. Because eternity is far beyond the action of the time factor that we see in this world. Each day and the beginning of the next day means we are closer and closer to destruction of the present physical state. This is the material concept of time. Material concept of time essentially has the feature of past, present, and future. So there are three different levels of time in material time. So something is going to get destroyed and something else gets created. This is material time. If one has conquered time, it means that they have an eternal relationship with Krishna. Or if you have an eternal relationship with Krishna, which you have discovered, which you have arrived at through your sadhana, through the mercy of Mahamantra, through the mercy of Guru and Sadhu, then that relationship is eternal, which means you have conquered time. Nothing is going to change. Regardless of what is going to change in the environment, nothing is going to change because your eternal identity has now been unfolded. It is fully present. So you are going to be acting according to that identity on a day-to-day basis. This is the objective of our sadhana. The objective of our sadhana is when we start with the Mahamantra re-establishes our connection with Krishna because the Mahamantra is non-different from Krishna. When we start coming in touch with a sadhu who is in touch with Krishna at whatever level, to that extent they have the ability to take our hand and place it in Krishna's hands. If we come in touch with Srimad Bhagavatam, we are re-establishing our identity in such a way, in a very powerful way, that we are actually participating in our eternal identity. None of these discussions have much in terms of what we would call a temporary state. We are already participating in an eternal journey. We are already in touch with eternal truth. We are already in touch with Krishna. So this is already the process of conquering time because we are establishing an eternal identity and we are learning what to do and what not to do in that identity. So the process of identity establishment, and then that establishment of identity would allow us to understand how to manage time while being on this planet. That in turn would allow us to conquer over time. This is conquering time. This is basically conquering the effect of time. So this is the whole objective of spirituality, is you come in touch with a powerful process such as Krishna consciousness, the most powerful process, because, and I'm using the word most not because I'm biased, not because this is my chosen process because I was fortunate enough to come in touch with devotees. I'm using the word most powerful because this process directly puts us in touch with Krishna, who is the Samam Bonam. Which part of our daily process is linked to the temporal world? Nothing is. Everything is linked to the spiritual sky. We are taught from day one that Krishna likes to wear these kind of clothes. We are taught from day one that he likes to eat certain kinds of foodstuff. We are taught from day one that this is how he interacts with his devotees. We are taught from day one as to who his devotees are. We've been given names of the spiritual residents of the spiritual sky. Which part of what we do here can you really say is connected to this world? None of it is. This is an eternal journey. So the point is, this whole process is designed to establish our spiritual identity in a gradual manner. The sadhana bhakti that we are engaging in is practically going to allow us to situate ourselves in the spiritual sky, transcending the modes of nature, and whilst doing so, establishing a deeper relationship with the Lord. And once the relationship is established, we start acting spontaneously in that relationship. The spontaneity slowly, steadily develops into deeper aspects of love, and that is prema. Then we start experiencing Krishna prema, where one has fully understood their role, one has fully understood their identity, and because they have fully understood their identity, they're interacting with the Supreme Lord in that identity whilst being in this body. Those individuals have conquered time. They have conquered time because now they are on an eternal path. Regardless of where the body is destined to be destroyed because that's the nature of the human body. It's by design going to get destroyed. It is going to perish. This is our existence. So using the time that we have efficiently, spiritually being very efficient, and using this time to re-establish and foster and strengthen our relationship with Krishna, and then having an opportunity to experience that relationship to the fullest extent whilst being on this planet. This is what we are doing here. We are trying to conquer. No, that's a secondary objective. Our objective of conquering time is a secondary objective. But if you're constantly going to be engaging in activity which has nothing to do with material time, you have conquered time. So this chapter is all about understanding the different processes and different compulsions and different challenges while people try and to establish themselves in a bid to leave the concept of material existence. What is being conveyed here is that at some point in your life, you really have to choose. You have to make the choice. You can't be drawn to 5, 10 different things. At some point in your life, you have to make a choice saying, this is how I'm going to spend time. Because this is valuable. I'm going to prioritize this aspect of my life more than anything else. Every decision that I make has to make sense to this identity of mine. Then what would happen is slowly, steadily, our world would change. And you would have noticed it. Even in the early stages when you come into Krishna consciousness, you will notice that your eating habits change. You will notice that a lot of things change in terms of how you spend time. You will notice that your set of friends have changed. You will notice that you have a completely new set of goals for life. This is at a very early stage. It's almost as if this occurs in the first and the second or third year of participation in the process. This is the mercy of the Mahamantra. This is the mercy of coming in touch with Srimad Bhagavatam. This is the mercy of coming in touch with those who have already established a more permanent journey. They are already on the path. They are very firm. As a consequence, they have the ability to influence us by their example, by precept. This is preceptor. A guru has the example, can set the example. Sadhu can set the example because by precept they're acting. They are no longer acting on this plane. So this particular chapter is about understanding that at some point in time you have to make a choice. You have to take inventory of what is happening in your life. You have to put everything on the table and you have to see what is making sense and what is not making sense. Most of us complain about a lack of time. In reality, that complaint is a good complaint to have in devotional service if you do not have time. If you're constantly pressured in acting in devotional service versus doing what you ought to do in this world, and you see that devotional service slowly, steadily is pushing things out and making room for itself, it's a positive sign. So being busy for a devotee is a good sign. Being complacent is not so much a good sign because it means that you have a lot of time in your hands and it is not being very efficient. So being very busy, carving out time to chant your rounds, carving out times to do your service is a good thing, because slowly, steadily, pressure is building where it's pushing out the inconsequential from your lives. Then there would be a time when we would take very deep, thoughtful decisions, where we would say, I have been spending, let's say, for example, 50-60% of my time in the week on devotional activities. That's where my happiness is. I spend the remaining 40% as a matter of tolerance. Now it is time for me to plan in such a way the remaining 40% is also given to Krishna. So you start categorizing activities, you start planning for the future, you start looking at ways in which you could reduce your involvement with unnecessary aspects of life. You start simplifying your existence so that you don't have to think about things which you don't have to think about. Simplification. We say a simple devotee is an efficient devotee. A devotee who is simple-minded, who has a simple existence, means that they have less things to worry about which can take them away from Krishna. Then they can more efficiently focus on Krishna consciousness. So there has to be some kind of planning, there has to be some kind of, I would say, acknowledgement of the fact that it's necessary for us to think about the future as being exclusively Krishna conscious. Yeah? Not exclusively focusing on a career, not exclusively focusing on being something else in life, being exclusively Krishna conscious, saying, how can I focus 100% on the services and the duties associated with Krishna consciousness? What is it that I can do which would allow me that kind of time? So that is the purpose of this discussion today. This is the gist. I'm just going to read through the verses as we look at different people who are extraordinarily busy in carrying out and executing duties in this world. How are they basically transitioning from being very busy in the world to being very busy and focused on the transition out of this world? Yeah? So let's just read the verses and the translations. For the sake of using our time, because we're already late, I'm just going to stick to the translations instead of the verses themselves. And then, all of you could read through the verses in your own time. This is chapter 13 of the first canto. It is entitled Dhṛtarāṣṭra Quits Home. And then I would make brief comments as we pass through these translations. Sri Sutta Goswami said, while traveling on a pilgrimage, Vidura received knowledge of the destination of the self from the great sage Maitreya, and then returned to Hastinapura. He became as well versed in the subject as he desired. So he had some very, very deep desires. Vidura, who is the third son or third brother, there's Dhṛtarāṣṭra, Pandu, Vidura. 3 different mothers, but the same father. Srila Vyasadeva is the father, and then there are the 3 queens the 2 queens and then their maidservant. The son of the maidservant is Vidura. And apparently, this is he who is basically Dharmaraja himself, who is one of the Mahajanas, is now born as Vidura. But then, even though he lives in a palace, he lives in some kind of a royal society as a minister, he functions as a minister, he also carries the label of being born to a servant. Because his mother was a servant of the queens. And she basically, begets Vidura through Vyasadeva. So the point which you're just trying to make here is that he also carries this label. What is being seen here is that Yamaraj is being cursed to live as a Shudra. So he carries this label. He doesn't function as a Shudra, but he carries this label. And he's very sensitive on how to do this. He basically functions in society as a minister, but he also carries the label of a Shudra, being born to a woman who was a servant to the queens, to the mothers of Pandu and Dhṛtarāṣṭra. So a sage is cursing Vidura. He is cursing him because the sage basically is cursing Yamaraj and telling Emiraj that because you did not do your duties properly and you did not represent Dharma properly, it is important for you to be born as a Shudra. Shudra existence essentially means that you forget the purpose of life. Please translate it this way. Shudra existence means you forget the the goal of life. Because the Shudra existence essentially means you also fundamentally are focused on the senses. Shudra means very much focused on the senses. Eating, sleeping, mating, defending. The psychology of a Shudra is such that they will not be peaceful if the eating, mating, sleeping, defending is disturbed. They cannot do any sadhana if eating, mating, sleeping, defending is disturbed. Yeah? The fundamental needs of the body, if that is getting disturbed, they can't function. That is Sudra. That is the psychology of a Shudra. A Brahmana can be deprived. They can function. They can function with all kinds of disturbances around them. But Shudra cannot. So that is the curse of the sage. He's basically saying you have to be a Shudra. So he is not a Shudra in duties, Vidura. He is not. He is extraordinarily powerful. He is a Brahmana. He is extraordinarily powerful. He is a Brahmana by his role. And he is also a great devotee, which transcends all these classifications. But he is also living under the label of being a Shudra. After asking various questions and becoming established in the transcendental loving service of Lord Krishna, Vidura retired from putting questions to Maitreya Muni. So it was customary for those who were going on a pilgrimage, not so much to go on a pilgrimage, on a yatra, simply to visit the holy places. It was also customary to associate. In fact, it was the whole purpose of pilgrimage was, if I were to go on a pilgrimage, then I will have an opportunity to meet with transcendental personalities. Then we could receive transcendental knowledge. So this was basically an attempt to get sadhu sangha, because great personalities were found in all these special places in different places around Bharatvarsha. So the purpose of pilgrimage was to get association. Because these great personalities could shun society, they would not be a part of society, and they used to live in the forests, they used to live alongside great sites of pilgrimage. Those places of pilgrimage became prominent because these personalities lived there. So he went on a pilgrimage and he met the great sage Maitreya, and he posed questions and received answers. Apparently he was satisfied. This whole situation occurred because he was frustrated with the war, which could have been averted, and he just went away because he didn't participate. He just went away on a pilgrimage. When they saw Vidura return to the palace, all the inhabitants, Maharaj Yudhishthira, his younger brothers Dhṛtarāṣṭra, Satyaki, Sanjaya, Kripacharya, Kunti, Gandhari, Draupadi, Subhadra, Uttara, Kripi, many other wives of the Kauravas and other ladies with children, all hurried to him in great delight. It so appeared that they had regained their consciousness after a long period. So basically, he was such a powerful personality, Vidura. He was Yamaraj's incarnation. So obviously he was a Mahajan. He had the capacity to offer devotional service by his presence. As a consequence, we see here that people had lost their consciousness when he left, and when he returns, they feel as if they have regained their consciousness by his association. With great delight, they all approached him as if life had returned to their bodies. They exchanged obeisances and welcomed each other with embraces. Due to anxieties and long separation, they all cried out of affection. King Yudhishthira then arranged to offer sitting accommodations and a reception. After Vidura ate sumptuously and took sufficient rest, he was comfortably seated. Then the king began to speak to him, and all who were present there listened. Maharaj Yudhishthira said, "My uncle, do you remember how you always protected us, along with our mother, from all sorts of calamities? Your partiality, like the wings of a bird, saved us from poisoning and arson." So the poisoning which Yudhishthira is referring to is the poisoning of Bhima by Duryodhana when he was a child. And he is also referring to arson. The arson that is being referred to here is the arson or the setting of fire, which is being done by basically what I would call as Shakuni and the Kauravas, who basically are there trying to kill the Pandavas. While traveling on the surface of the earth, how did you maintain your livelihood? At which holy places and pilgrimage sites did you render service? My Lord, devotees like your good self are verily holy places personified, because you carry the personality of Godhead within your heart. You turn all places into places of pilgrimage. My uncle, you must have visited Dwaraka. In that holy place are our friends and well-wishers, the descendants of Yadu, who are always wrapped in the service of the Lord Sri Krishna. You might have seen them or heard about them. Are they living happily in their abodes? Thus being questioned by Maharaj Yudhishthira, Mahatma Vidura gradually described everything he had personally experienced except news of the annihilation of the Yadu dynasty. He didn't share anything about the annihilation of the Yadu dynasty. He shared everything about the journey. And the reason he didn't share was because this unpleasant news, this unpleasant negative news is such that it can overwhelm everyone. And as a consequence, they would even forget the message he was wanting to give. So one needs to understand, whenever one experiences the mode of ignorance, whenever one experiences negativity, which is the mode of ignorance, then it would tend to overwhelm and stick itself on the chitta, on the consciousness, for a much longer time than any other experience. So if there's trauma, people can't forget trauma easily. So as a consequence, once someone hears traumatic news, then they become very overwhelmed. And because they become overwhelmed, they forget the true message. They can't hear the message anymore. So Vidura did not want to really be the carrier of bad tidings that the Yadu dynasty had perished. He basically kept everything to himself, and he was sharing other knowledge which he had obtained along in the pilgrimage. Compassionate Mahatma Vidura could not stand to see the Pandavas distressed at any time. Therefore, he did not disclose this unpalatable and unbearable incident, because calamities come of their own accord. The logic is, calamities, bad experiences in life, they come on their own accord, because karmically we are destined to experience a few things. They come on their own accord. And as a consequence, what is the necessity to bring bad tidings in advance? Let it come on its own accord. Why be a carrier of such news? Thus Mahatma Vidura, being treated just like a godly person by his kinsmen, remained there for a certain period just to rectify the mentality of his eldest brother, and in this way bring happiness to all others. As long as Vidura played the part of a Shudra, being cursed by Manduka Muni, Aryama officiated at the post of Yamaraj to punish those who committed sinful acts. So the story here is that there was a sage called Manduka Muni, and this sage, he was a part of a kingdom, and there were some thieves, people who participated in theft, some thieves. They hid in the ashram of Manduka Muni. And when the soldiers of the king went to arrest these thieves, they found these thieves in the ashram, and they arrested the Muni also along with the thieves. And then the Muni was sentenced to death by, being pierced by a lance. But before the event of his killing were to happen, the king came to understand that his soldiers had mistakenly arrested Manduka Muni. And he rushed and stopped that particular punishment and sought to beg forgiveness from the Muni for causing such distress and such trauma to him. Then the Muni basically wanted to know, why is it that I was even captured? Why was I brought in front of the king? What is it? What kind of karma did I engage in which practically brought me this kind of an experience? It's a very negative experience for a sage to be caught with thieves and to be punished as if he was a thief. So he approached Yamaraj, because it is Yamaraj's service to decide punishment. What is it that you're going to experience for something which has happened in the past? So he approached Yamaraj. And when he approached Yamaraj and he sought answers from him, saying, why is it that I'm experiencing this? Yamaraj reminded him that as a child, you lanced or pierced small ants and insects for no reason at all. They were innocent. So I was explaining that Mandukya Muni approached Yamaraj to understand, why did I get caught like a common thief? What did I do in the past which prompted the soldiers of the king to catch me? Then Yamaraj started explaining to him. He said, as a child, you used to capture small insects and you used to torture them by lancing them, putting a pin, putting a nail through a small insect, pinning down an ant. This is something which you did, and that is the reason why you're being exposed to this issue where you're supposed to experience this. Mandukya Muni perceived that this was highly unjust because what he did as a child was inconsequential, because he was quite innocent, he was not very fully aware, etc. To punish him after so many years, after he became a devotee and he practiced saintly life, he found it to be very unjust, and he found that this was not what was supposed to be done. So what did he do? He basically cursed Yamaraj, saying, since you have forgotten duties of religion, you will lead the life of a Shudra for 100 years. Because Shudra life means forgetting what is important. So basically he cursed him to be a Shudra. But then this is Yamaraj. He is one of the Mahajanas. He is a great devotee of the Lord. As a consequence, he was born in a royal family to a Shudra woman to fulfill that particular curse. And he also became a minister. So his functioning was Brahminical. His birth was Shudra. So this is quite, I would say, an important revelation that at the beginning of Bhagavatam, they are laying the foundation for devotional service. That devotional service and understanding transcendence, number one, it does not depend on birth. Number two, one is recognized by their activities rather than their birth. So in this case, Vidura was 100% Brahminical. More than that, he was a Vaishnava. He was a great preceptor. He was a teacher of Vaishnava teachings. He used to basically be a source of inspiration for others. And as a consequence, he is an authority. So the point which you're trying to make is that very early in the Bhagavatam, we are seeing a contradiction where someone was born as a Shudra, somewhat of a lower level, but then his qualities were so extraordinary that he was recognized as an authority in Krishna consciousness. He was also recognized as an authority overall in different subject matters as a Brahmana would. So this is basically establishing the fact that birth does not interfere with Krishna consciousness. There is no constraint. Having won his kingdom and observed the birth of one grandson competent to continue the noble tradition of his family, Maharaj Yudhishthira reigned peacefully and enjoyed uncommon opulence in cooperation with his younger brothers, who were all expert administrators to the common people. Insurmountable eternal time imperceptibly overcomes those who are too much attached to family affairs and are always engrossed in their thoughts. So again, insurmountable eternal time imperceptibly overcomes those who are too much attached to family affairs and are always engrossed in their thought. What does it mean? When you become too attached to family affairs and become always engrossed in the thought, it means that the identity of being a member of a family has overcome and subdued the identity of being a servant of Krishna. When we find that family activities are becoming so intense that we have no time whatsoever for devotional service, then that is a sign that the identity of being a family person with family responsibilities has overcome that of Krishna consciousness. So if one were to depend on the identity of being Krishna's servant, then the identity of taking care of the family will also happen efficiently. So this is not advised to give up family. This is not advised to give up anything. It is advised that if you do not take care of Krishna consciousness can manage time for us. Why can Krishna consciousness manage time? Krishna consciousness can manage time because Krishna consciousness is eternal. If you focus on Krishna consciousness, that will give us the ability to manage time in this world with regard to other affairs. we can change the course of destiny, because real power is Krishna consciousness. If we are Krishna conscious, then we have the ability to manage our affairs of the family in an efficient way, because real power is Krishna consciousness. So we can change the course of destiny on this planet by becoming Krishna conscious. However, if we focus on just the activities of this planet and assume the identity of being in a certain body related to some person, related to those activities, then that doesn't have the power to change destiny. We're going to just particularly be drawn into the challenges of life. So this is a distinction one has to understand. If you want to manage time, you have to tap into eternal time. When we tap into eternal time, it gives us the ability to manage temporary time, because eternal time is superior. This is a very, very simple but lucid truth. It's actually quite clear. So what I'm trying to say is, this is the whole idea. You want to manage something temporary, find a slot above that. If you want to manage a lower level of consciousness, you have to develop a higher level of consciousness. The higher level of consciousness can control the lower level of consciousness. That is also the same message. So the point we are trying to make is that if we focus on the identity of this world, the several identities, we could be focusing on the identity of a professional, be focusing on the identity of being someone in a certain family, being focused on the identity of being born in a certain place, as a consequence having duties related to that particular place where we are born. These are all duties that are associated and identities that are associated with the body. When we exclusively focus on all of this, we can't really manage any of these, because there's very little room for changing. However, if we focus on the eternal identity, then the temporary time, which is connected to all these different identities, can also be managed very efficiently. That is the whole principle. There's greater power in Krishna consciousness, obviously, because all power is centered on Krishna. And that blessing, that spiritual capacity, gives us the ability to practically chart out a future which is much better in every other identity as well. Mahatma Vidura knew all this, and therefore he addressed Dhṛtarāṣṭra, saying, "My dear king, please get out of here immediately. Do not delay. Just see how fear has overtaken you. This frightful situation cannot be remedied by any person in this material world. My Lord, it is the Supreme Personality of Godhead as eternal time, Kala, that has approached us all. Whoever is under the influence of Supreme Kala must surrender his most dear life, and what to speak of other things such as wealth, honor, children, land, and home. Supreme Kala, eternal time, as manifested in this particular world, when we recognize Krishna as time, it means that we are actually experiencing destruction. Time means destruction. That is the perception and understanding of time in this world. Yeah? Eternal time is the opposite. It does not have the quality of past. Eternal time is very different. So, eternal time has a very different quality. So, when we engage in activities which are completely eternal, when we develop an eternal identity, when we develop an eternal connection, and we also engage in service and activities and Sangha, which is all connected to an eternal truth, then we are very much plugging into eternal time. Your father, brother, well-wishers and sons are all dead and passed away. You yourself have expended the major portion of your life. Your body is now overtaken by invalidity, and you're living in the home of another. See, these are all very unfortunate conditions for a king. For anybody, but for a king. You have been blind from your very birth, and recently you have become hard of hearing. Your memory is shortened, and your intelligence is disturbed. Your teeth are loose, your liver is defective, and you are coughing up mucus. Alas, how powerful are the hopes of a living being to continue his life. Verily, you are living just like a household dog and are eating remnants of food given by Bhima. Vidura is speaking some very harsh truth. It's actually quite harsh. Very harsh truth is being spoken by Vidura. And when he is speaking very harsh truth, he is basically also talking all of these truths to Dhṛtarāṣṭra so that he would wake up. When someone speaks very intensely, we tend to wake up. If someone is always going to be soft and they're going to be sensitive and they don't speak the truth, then such a person will never be able to assist us. So it is necessary to hear the truth so that we could wake up. And he is basically telling him that your sons were killed by Bhima. Now you are under the shelter of Bhima. How despicable is that existence? Your dependence on and being in the shelter of Bhima, who killed your own sons, there's nothing worse than that. So you're like a dog. You have no shame, you're just completely dependent, and you're just wanting to continue this royal existence because you're able to live in a royal palace, you're being treated in a certain way, and you have forgotten all of this is connected to people who actually killed your sons. So where is the respect for you? What are you trying to cling on to? He is basically trying to get into Dhṛtarāṣṭra's head and make him see the truth so that he could leave this particular surrounding. There is no need to live a degraded life and subsist on the charity of those whom you tried to kill by arson and poisoning. You also insulted one of their wives and usurped their kingdom and wealth. Yeah? So, there is no need to live a degraded life and subsist on the charity of those whom you tried to kill by arson and poisoning. So, Dhṛtarāṣṭra's sons tried to kill the Pandavas. Now, Dhṛtarāṣṭra has taken shelter of the same people. So, wouldn't there be some kind of a disturbance which the Pandavas would remember when they see Dhṛtarāṣṭra? So, he is being challenged by Vidura, saying, how dumb is this? How degraded in his existence is this? What is it which you're trying to accomplish by being in this place after you have done so much harm to them and they have also retaliated by killing your sons? You're like a dog. You just don't have, any kind of purpose. You're just here because you're getting 3 meals and you have a shelter. Despite your unwillingness to die and your desire to live even at the cost of honor and prestige, your miserly body will certainly dwindle and deteriorate like an old garment. So he is basically saying, you are not willing to die, but does it mean your body is not going to deteriorate? He's hitting him with logic, he's also hitting him emotionally. He's trying to basically bring him out of complacency. He is called undisturbed who goes to an unknown, remote place and freed from all obligations, quits his material body when it has become useless. He is certainly a first-class man who awakens and understands, either by himself or from others, the falsity and misery of this material world, and thus leaves home and depends fully on the personality of Godhead residing within his heart. Please therefore leave for the north immediately without letting your relatives know, for soon that time will approach which will diminish the good qualities of men. Thus Maharaj Dhṛtarāṣṭra, the scion of the family of Ajamida, firmly convinced by the introspective knowledge, prajna, broke at once the strong network of familial affection by his resolute determination. Kshatriyas by nature are very determined, and they can't really live through insults because they are strictly very much situated in the higher qualities of passion. Passion basically does not allow one to take insults very easily. It doesn't. So the moment he heard all of this from Vidura, his mind became freed. He started getting into the fire of being a Kshatriya, saying, how could I receive charity? Because the Kshatriya should not be receiving charity. I should be giving charity. Instead, now my situation is that I'm in a charitable position where someone else is feeding me. So he immediately woke up. Thus he immediately left home to set out on the path of liberation as directed by his younger brother Vidura. The gentle and chaste Gandhari, who was the daughter of King Shubala of Kandahar or Gandhara, followed her husband, seeing that he was going to the Himalaya mountains, which are the delight of those who have accepted the staff of renounced order, like fighters who have accepted a good lashing from the enemy. Yeah? So Gandhari, she is from the modern day Kandahar. It is supposed to be, basically we are talking about Afghanistan, the modern day Afghanistan, and that is the reason why in those days it was called Gandhar, and she became Gandhari as she was a princess. So she's being described by her birth name. So she basically also followed her husband, which is an extraordinary example. She was in fact far, far more astute in understanding duty than Dhṛtarāṣṭra. Maharaj Yudhishthira, whose enemy was never born, performed his daily morning duties by praying, offering fire sacrifice to the sun god, and offering obeisances, grains, cows, land and gold to the brahmanas. He then entered the palace to pay respects to the elderly. However, he could not find his uncles or aunt, the daughter of King Shubala. Maharaj Yudhishthira, full of anxiety, turned to Sanjaya, who was sitting there, and said, "Oh Sanjaya, where is our uncle, who is old and blind? Where is my well-wisher uncle Vidura and mother Gandhari, who is very afflicted due to her son's demise? My uncle Dhṛtarāṣṭra was also very mortified due to the death of all his sons and grandsons. Undoubtedly I am very ungrateful. Did he therefore take my offences very seriously and along with his wife drown himself in the Ganges? When my father Pandu fell down and we were all small children, these two uncles gave us protection from all kinds of calamities. They were always our good well-wishers. Alas, where have they gone now from here?" Sutta Goswami said, because of compassion and mental agitation, Sanjaya, not having seen his own master Dhṛtarāṣṭra, was aggrieved and could not properly reply to Maharaj Yudhishthira. See, Sanjaya was quite extraordinary because Sanjaya heard the entire conversation between Krishna and Arjun. So he received the entire knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita, and he was a charioteer. Being a charioteer is a Shudra role. Being a charioteer is a Shudra role. So even though he was a Shudra by birth and he was performing the activities of a Shudra, he was quite exalted by nature that he was able to basically receive the Bhagavad Gita directly. He was quite blessed due to Vyasadev's blessings because of his good qualities. Now, what is the good quality? Now we see here in this particular verse that Sanjaya was actually bemoaning, he was lamenting the absence of Dhṛtarāṣṭra. He was performing the role of a proper Shudra. A Shudra is supposed to be very loyal. He was performing the role of a Shudra where he was literally lamenting the absence of his master. Yeah, that is what a Shudra is supposed to do. Being very loyal to the master, the Shudra then elevates himself in a subsequent birth to a higher plane of consciousness. Because he is doing his duty as a Shudra very nicely, he gets elevated into a higher level of consciousness in the subsequent birth. So we see here that Sanjaya, even though he was exalted, he was also a Shudra by work. And as a consequence, he was basically demonstrating the right attitude of a Shudra of being very loyal to the master. Sutta Goswami said, firstly, he slowly pacified his mind by intelligence, and wiping away his tears and thinking of the feet of his master Dhṛtarāṣṭra, he began to reply to Maharaj Yudhishthira. Slowly pacified his mind by intelligence. So first, when someone is very emotional, the next step is to pacify their mind through intelligence. So we start looking at Shastric conclusions, logic. Intelligence has the capacity to control the mind. Intelligence is higher than the mind. Intelligence, when it is in touch with Shastra, when it is in touch with Guru, when it is in touch with Sadhu, has the ability to become pure, and that purity of the intelligence can control the lower hierarchy of the mind. When the mind becomes controlled by the intelligence, it has the ability to capture and not be disturbed by the senses. Sanjaya said, "My dear descendant of the Kuru dynasty, I have no information of the determination of your two uncles. and Gandhari. O king, I have been cheated by these great souls, by those great souls. While Sanjaya was thus speaking, Sri Narada, the powerful devotee of the Lord, appeared on the scene carrying his tumburu. Maharaj Yudhishthira and his brothers received him properly by getting up from their seats and offering obeisances. Maharaj Yudhishthira said, O godly personality, I do not know where all my two uncles have gone, nor can I find my ascetic aunt who is grief-stricken by the loss of all her sons. You are like a captain of a ship in a great ocean, and you can direct us to our destination. Thus addressed the godly personality Devarishi Narada, greatest of the philosopher devotees, began to speak. So Sri Narad Muni reaches there, and it is so fascinating to see that whenever great devotees are wanting direction, Sri Narad Muni appears, because he is in charge of devotional service. He offers devotional direction to all these great personalities. So it is very important to note that he basically supports devotional service and offers clarification and offers direction to all the devotees who are practicing devotional service in different ways. So it's fascinating to see how he appears the moment the doubts come in the mind of Yudhishthira. Sri Narada said, O pious king, do not lament for anyone, for everyone is under the control of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, all living beings and their leaders carry on worship to be well protected. It is He only who brings them together and disperses them. As a cow bound through the nose by a long rope is conditioned, so also human beings are bound by different Vedic injunctions and are conditioned to obey the orders of the Supreme. Yeah? So there are constraints being imposed by the Vedas, and here an example is being given of a cow which imagines itself to be free because the rope which is being tying the cow is long. So that if you put a pole and you tie a cow with the rope, if it's a very long rope, the cow, being very satisfied in grazing the grass, can imagine itself to be free, but in reality there is a constraint. So there is a conditioning. It cannot really move away from the boundaries of its conditioning. In a similar fashion, we are also bound by our conditioning. And he is basically saying that you have to follow the path which is being ordained by Krishna, because that is the only way to give up conditioning. As a player sets up and disperses his playthings according to his own sweet will, so the supreme will of the Lord brings men together and separates them. O king, in all circumstances, whether you consider the soul to be an eternal principle, or the material body to be perishable, or everything to exist in the imperial, impersonal absolute truth, or everything to be an inexplicable combination of matter and spirit, feelings of separation are due only to illusory affection and nothing more. Therefore, give up your anxiety due to ignorance of the self. You are now thinking of how they who are helpless poor creatures will exist without you. So he is basically, Yudhishthira, because of his attachment and because of his nature, is actually lamenting the absence of all his relatives, thinking, oh, if they had been here, I would have given them this and I would have taken care of them this way and that way. In reality, it is because he basically thinks that he is in charge of their future. But Sri Narad Muni is clarifying, saying that this is your ignorance, that you are thinking that they are dependent on you. They are not dependent on you. They are walked away. This gross material body made of 5 elements is already under the control of eternal time, kala, action, karma, and the modes of material nature, guna. How then can it be already in the jaws of the serpent protect others? So this is an interesting concept, saying time, kala, is eternal. It is eternal because it's perpetual, it keeps going. And it overcomes all the body and the relationships that we have, because all of this is temporary. And as we spoke earlier before we started this session, the way for us to really work towards eternal life is to engage fully with Krishna, who is eternal in different aspects. Srimad Bhagavatam, eternal. Sadhu Sangha, eternal. Yeah, they can inspire us to do what is appropriate, and they cultivate our eternal connection. Mahamantra, eternal. Worship of the deity, non-different from Krishna, eternal. Residing and aspiring to reside in the holy Dham, eternal, because the Dham is eternal. So, the point which is being made here is that if you are in a body and you're conditioned by this body and you're conditioned by its existence, which is all very temporary in the context of eternal time, then what is basically going to assist us? How can we basically, being already in the jaws of the serpent, protect others? We can only protect others by bringing them in touch with eternality, with Krishna. Those who are devoid of hands are prey for those who have hands. Those devoid of legs are prey for the four-legged. The weak are the subsistence of the strong, and the general rule holds that one living being is food for another. Therefore, O King, you should look to the Supreme Lord only, who is one without a second and who manifests himself by different energies and is born both within and without. That Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna, in the guise of all devouring time, has now descended on earth to eliminate the envious from the world. The Lord has already performed his duties to help the demigods and is awaiting the rest. You Pandavas may wait as long as the Lord is here on the earth. O King, your uncle Dhṛtarāṣṭra, his brother Vidura, and his wife Gandhari have gone to the southern side of the Himalaya mountains, where there are shelters of the great sages. The place is called Dhṛtarāṣṭra, because there the waters of the sacred Ganges were divided into 7 branches. This was done for the satisfaction of the 7 great rishis. The 7 great rishis are the Saptarishis. They are a part of the guiding force in the material creation, and they are also considered to be the progenitors, or I would say, if you form a genealogical table, then you relate to them from a genealogical aspect as well, because they are basically the seed of creation, the fundamental seed of creation. So in India, you have the different gotras. In India, you have different gotras. The different gotras, for instance, have Bharadwaj Gotra, Shandilya Gotra. You have different gotras which people claim their connection to. And this is seen mostly in more, I would say, cultured families where you can find that they have some knowledge of what their gotra is and what their connection is to one of the rishis. This is basically ancient, genealogical tables which associate a soul who is born today with one of the rishis. And then the idea is that if you're born into one of the genealogical connections to a rishi, for example, if you're born in the Bharadwaj Rishi Gotra, then you're not supposed to find a husband or wife in the same Gotra, because then there would be issues with progeny. So they maintained, I would say, some diversity in the idea of furthering the population by ensuring that people didn't marry into the same Gotra. You are not supposed to marry into the same Gotra, because marrying into the same Gotra means that both the husband and wife belong to the same family tree, which essentially also means that there can, it is almost like a sister and brother in certain ways. There's a lot of, I would say, genetic commonality which can then cause issues for the children who are coming. So this knowledge of Gotra was used to basically understand, number one, who the sage was. So there were many kind of, I would say, rituals which always used to start with the propitiation of the specific sage who started the Gotra. And then you also had the idea of managing, relationships by ensuring that one doesn't marry into the same Gotra. So the point is, the 7 great rishis, the Sapta Rishis, they were also considered to be the origin of all the Gotras. So that is what is being mentioned here, is that the Ganga was divided into 7 different parts for satisfying the 7 rishis, and that was the spot where the division was taking place. And that is considered to be a very important spot for the purpose of spiritual, or I would say, the purpose of pursuing transcendental activities. So that was the spot which Dhṛtarāṣṭra chose. On the banks at the Sapta Shrotra, Dhṛtarāṣṭra is now engaged in beginning Ashtanga Yoga by bathing 3 times daily, in the morning, noon, and evening, by performing the Agnihotra sacrifice with fire, and by drinking only water. This helps one control the mind and the senses and frees one completely from thoughts of familial affection. So basically, as the senses become weak, then the attachment of the senses also becomes weak. When one is fasting and one is also establishing their spiritual identity, the other identities are becoming weak. This was the whole purpose of Dhṛtarāṣṭra being asked by Vidura to walk away, go away to the forest, start focusing on your eternal life. One who has controlled the sitting postures, the yogic asanas, and the breathing process can turn the senses towards the absolute personality of Godhead, and thus become immune to the contaminations of the modes of material nature, namely mundane goodness, passion, and ignorance. So yoga, Ashtanga yoga, which is 8 parts, Ashta means 8, Anga is branches, Ashtanga yoga, it has 8 different progressive stages. The first stage is Yama, which is morally ethical rules and principles of society, which is called Yama. Then there's Niyama. Then there are specific rules and regulations for removing the conditioning of the soul, and also for progression in regulating the daily activities. So there is Yama, there's Niyama, and then there is Pranayama. There is Yama, Niyama, Asana, then there is Pranayama. So the next stage is Asana. Once one is completely controlled and is following ethical principles, the third stage is Asana, yogic asana. And the third stage is basically also the fact of performing asanas in such a manner that you can adhere to a process of purifying the physical senses, because each of the asanas can be grouped into being able to directly influence a certain element in the body, and purifying the bodily elements, and also establishing oneself in a posture so that they can perform certain yogic principles. Then the fourth aspect is pranayama, which is practically using the breath to purify our existence. You see, we sometimes use the word being in touch with society. We are in touch with society based on the air that surrounds us. So when we purify the air that is going in and we increase our prana, then we have the ability to interact with society more efficiently. So the fourth principle of pranayama literally basically focuses on purifying Vayu Tattva, the Tattva of Vayu, which is the air element in the body. The fifth is Pratyahara. Pratyahara means basically withdrawing of the senses through all the previous 4 practices. Basically, fifth practice, Pratyahara, means you're purifying your senses and you're basically not going to engage your senses in sense gratification. Then after Pratyahara, then you have Dharana. Dharana means concentration. Once the senses are withdrawn, then there is concentration, Dharana. Then you have Dhyana, the 7th stage, where you meditate on a particular deity form in the heart. And finally, the 8th aspect is Samadhi. If you notice that these 8 different aspects of Ashtanga Yoga, they're all completely dependent on the individual's ability to perform these different aspects. There is very little in terms of mercy that can come in. So in the modern day, trying to think that we can perform Ashtanga Yoga to attain the Supreme is actually an extraordinarily difficult concept, because the whole process of Ashtanga Yoga is completely dependent on the efficiency of the practitioner to a large extent. The process of Bhakti Yoga, on the other hand, is not so much dependent on our ability, which is quite limited, but dependent on Krishna's mercy. So that is the reason why for Kali Yuga, Bhakti Yoga is considered to be most efficient. Dhṛtarāṣṭra will have to amalgamate his pure identity with intelligence and then merge into the Supreme Being with knowledge of this qualitative oneness. As a living entity with the Supreme Brahman, being freed from the block sky, he will have to rise to the spiritual sky. So that is a part of what the Ashtanga Yoga process is. you slowly, steadily purify yourself. Then you purify and understand your identity. Then you merge qualitatively into the identity of the Supreme, what lies beyond the material world, and then you basically depart. He will have to suspend all the actions of the senses, even from the outside, and will have to be impervious to interaction of the senses, which are influenced by the modes of material nature. After renouncing all material duties, he must become immovably established beyond all sources of hindrances on the path. So this is all basically Ashtanga Yoga, where you have to suspend everything, withdraw your senses, do not engage with the world whatsoever, and then you have the ability to move forward. In our situation, we engage with whatever we have with the world, but slowly, steadily, after establishing our identity with Krishna's nature, in identity with Krishna. When we identify with Krishna in terms of being his servants, then slowly, steadily we progress in changing our activity. Slowly, steadily the purification begins. Here, it is a forced situation. They have to sit and then withdraw everything and then focus on the intelligence. And that's a very difficult thing to do in the modern world. O king, he will quit his body most probably on the 5th day from today, and his body will turn to ashes. It's quite interesting. The yogis had the capacity to increase Agni in their body. Everything in this world has Agni. Everything in this world has fire. We say, for example, that wood, when rubbed against wood, it can produce fire. When bamboo stalks rub against each other in the forest, they produce a forest fire. So where was the fire? How does it exist? The fire exists in the bamboo. The fire exists in the piece of wood. Because it exists in the piece of wood and it exists in the bamboo, friction produces and causes the fire to come out. Similarly, within our bodies, we have fire in the digestive system. The digestive fire is also basically fire which is contained and managed efficiently to help us transform food. Yeah? It is called the Jatharagni. So there are different kinds of Agni. This is called the Jatharagni. The digestive fire is called the Jatharagni. Now, what we are trying to say here is that there is fire within the body. The yogic process can increase this fire to such a point where when they leave the body, they can cause the body to destroy by fire on its own. They can basically increase the fire to such an extent that it starts burning up the whole body. It's like intense fever, to the point where it can basically destroy and burn the body itself, which is what is being explained here. So that's what Dhṛtarāṣṭra did. He basically chose to leave, and because he was alone and he was in a forest, he was elsewhere, he did not depend on others to commit the funeral ceremonies, etc. He simply increased the Agni, burnt his body, and he departed, which is what is being shared here. Quite fascinating to see that. While outside observing her husband, who will burn in the fire of mystic power, along with his thatched cottage, his chaste wife will enter the fire with rapt attention. This is quite intense. How do women described in Shastra commit sati? This ancient practice, as every other ancient practice, it got abused, and there were many women who were forced to enter into the funeral pyre of their husbands based on this practice. It was abandoned, I think, early part of the 19th century. It was going on until then in different parts of India. So the point is, how does a woman enter into fire? Because she wasn't quite practicing Ashtanga Yoga. She was dependent on her husband, and she basically received the fruits of his activity as well. So she basically entered into the fire. How did she do that? This is a very interesting observation, because you also read that Queen Madri entered into the fire when Pandu was cremated. When the funeral fire was burning, Queen Madri entered into it. How can someone willingly enter into that particular fire? The answer is the fire of chastity of these women, Mother Gandhari and Mother Madri. The fire of chastity was so high that they could enter into physical fire and not experience pain. This is an explanation which is being given. So you could enter into physical fire because the amount of Agni from your own concept of chastity was so much available in the body that it was equal to the fire, the external fire that was burning. As a consequence, they wouldn't feel disturbed. You see, we read about Mother Sita entering into fire. Yeah? The same concept. The concept of entering into fire by women was because the fire of chastity was so intense that matched the intensity of the fire which was burning, and they could sustain it. Now, if that fire of chastity isn't available because of various reasons, because of the changes in modern practices, etc., it's insane to expect the woman to enter into the funeral pyre of the husband. It was happening around 150 years back in India. Yeah, it was very much prevalent. It is insane. It is insane because they just didn't have the spiritual, or I would say the potency of chastity for them to go and sit in a funeral pyre and not be experiencing pain. They would be experiencing intense pain. So lack of understanding of Shastra, but applying it blindly because of a societal demand, this is basically the evil which comes out of lack of understanding. So you see a couple of examples here and there, not understanding how they could do it. They force others to do it, and then the others experience intense pain. So this is the point which is being made here. Because if one's nature has become like fire, because it's pure like fire, then they have the ability to be protected by fire. They don't experience pain. Mother Gandhari is considered to be one of the most chaste women in history. She could enter into Dhṛtarāṣṭra's fire and not be consumed by it and be distracted. So she basically fixed her mind and entered in. This is what is being shown here. His chaste wife will enter the fire with rapt attention. That's why they're using the word satim. Satim is chastity. Sati is chastity. So if you're not chaste and the fire of chastity is not high and comparable to the physical fire, this is madness. But if the fire of chastity is equal and is equivalent to the physical fire, then it is something which is bearable, and it was done comfortably by these great women. So an understanding is required. If it is, then we can understand why sometimes these scriptural practices were quite harsh. Vidura, being affected with delight and grief, will then leave that place of sacred pilgrimage. Having spoken thus, the great sage Narada, along with his Veena, ascended into outer space. Yudhishthira kept his instruction in his heart and was so able to get rid of all lamentations. So Yudhishthira's intelligence was controlled by Narad Muni. When Sri Narad Muni spoke, his intelligence was controlled, and that control of intelligence allowed him to pacify his emotions. So if you want to control the mind, strengthen the intelligence. If you want to control the senses, strengthen the intelligence, because the intelligence will control the mind. The mind has the capacity to pull the senses back into order. So we stop here and we end this chapter. We'll take a few questions and we'll move forward. Any questions? Comments? Yes, I can. Haribol. No, it's all right. Go ahead. Yes. Correct. In the spiritual sky, if there is a tree, the tree itself is not running towards Krishna to serve him, but is readily serving Krishna when Krishna comes under the tree. So there is a relationship that is formed when Krishna comes there. So for example, there is a couch, there's a sofa, there's a couch. When Krishna goes and sits on the couch is serving Krishna, but the couch itself is not eager and running and wanting to serve Krishna in that sense. Do you understand? It is more of being available but not actively participating in that service. So that's how you understand this whole neutrality. It's a neutral rasa. And Mahaprabhu never encouraged that, because it was more important for us to engage our senses in the service of the Lord. So Srila Rupa Goswami's philosophy itself is, go use your hands, your limbs in the service of the Lord. As a consequence, ours is more of a voluntary attempt to serve Him, rather than saying, I'm just going to wait here, and Krishna, you come along, and by chance if you come along, then I don't mind rendering some service to you. I'm very eager to do that, but I'm satisfied with that position. So we can't be satisfied as servants. We want to constantly endeavor to see how we could please Him. So in that sense, Mahaprabhu never encouraged this. He basically gave us the four aspects, which is the four different rasas. And also the Mahamantra, which is our fundamental, I would say, foundational practice, is going to make us dynamic. It is not a static process. So the dynamic aspect of our sadhana is such that it would make us move in the direction of service actively, wanting opportunity for service, rather than thinking that I am just going to sit tight. So ours is a principle where we chant the Mahamantra sincerely, and we develop the ability to come in touch with the Lord through His name. And when we become more and more accomplished, then we have the ability to serve Him directly. But the whole concept here is that the Mahamantra basically is encouraging us to fall in the categories mentioned by Mahaprabhu, the four different categories, which is more dynamic. True. These desires just simply exemplify the humility of those who have authored the books that you have read. The question then becomes that they have understood the exalted nature of Braja, they have understood the exalted nature of relationships in Braja, and their hearts are so humble that they're questioning their authority to participate in such relationships. And they are saying, I would be satisfied even if I were to be given a somewhat neutral position, because that in itself would be in Braja a great boon. What to say of trying to be something else altogether? So this is more an aspect of their humility, rather than them basically desiring far less than what they already are, thinking that that's better. Does it make sense? Yeah, I mean, consider it, do we even have qualifications to be a tree, a pebble, a grain of sand in Braja? So, yeah, if you really think about it, and then you reach a conclusion, if you're humble, if you're sincere, then absolutely not. We have no qualification whatsoever to be anything in Braja. So, we could be told and it could be revealed that we are such and such in the company of Krishna. But then there is the reality that there is no qualification whatsoever to give us any position in Braja. So that's the reason why our acharyas have written such things. Hare Krishna, can you speak up a little bit, Mataji, if you don't mind? Oh. Yeah, so sorry, I'm not trying to laugh at your question, so don't mistake me. I was just chuckling. Yeah, yeah. No, don't worry. Because the reason why I'm saying this is because in the initial stages, number one, the first point is in the initial stages, there is no clarity, and that is why we are supposed to serve and make every attempt to offer a service. So basically, we are doing what is required to become a slave of the Lord, where His needs overcome and overwhelm our needs at a bodily and a mental and an emotional level. So this is our attempt in the initial stages. But then, when you cross the consciousness and of basically complete anartha nivritti, where you're giving up through the practice of sadhana bhakti the various distractions that come in terms of different identities, then we reach the point of nishta and above, which is being fixed in devotional service. At that time, the fixed mellow of who we are in relationship to Krishna, it starts becoming even more clear as we make progress. So it is perfectly fine for us to simply focus on where we are and what we are as of now and our motivations, and serve Him in whatever capacity we can. But there will come a time when this would become very, very clear. That is the first point. Second point is, servitude is the underlying foundation of all the rasas. All the rasas, regardless of whether it's dasya, sakya, vatsalya or madhurya, the objective is to serve. For example, the first expansion of Krishna, Balaram, his existence is to serve. What to say of us? Balaram's existence is to serve Krishna. He is Sevaka Bhagavan. So he may be a brother, he may treat Krishna as a friend, etc., etc. He is also the first expansion. Almost no difference between him and Krishna. But Balaram is a servant as well. So his whole foundation is service. So the point I'm trying to make is our foundation is service, and the more and more we become service oriented and we move towards, as we progress in our participation in sadhana bhakti, there will come a time when things will become clear as to what our conditioning is and things will become clear as to what our relationship is with Krishna. No problem. Is there anything else? Hare Krishna. Well, if you do not know your gotra, then we normally say that we belong to Achyuta Gotra. Srila Prabhupada basically said all the wonderful devotees who were born in the West, they were not quite familiar with what the Gotra was because the whole concept wasn't available. So they would basically say, Srila Prabhupada said, you would say you're Achyuta Gotra. Achyuta means Krishna himself. Yeah? So you basically say that you belong to his Gotra if you do not know the Gotra. Sure. Any other question, comment? Anything else? There's someone who has written, I think it's, sorry, go ahead please. Go ahead. Was someone raising a question? Yes, bro. Yeah, Haribo. Yeah, see, several things. Now, there can be certain physical aspects of our existence that we can use. Going and sitting down and chanting in the same place where we chanted yesterday, facing the same kind of wall, facing the same kind of spot, waking up at the same time, doing the same things in the same sequence, all of this can pacify the mind. Because the mind would be able to recognize that it is now 4 o'clock. This guy is getting up and then he's doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in a sequence. So the mind, if it gets used to a sequence every day, it doesn't disturb and agitate us when we chant. It is when we don't have control over our time during the day, where sometimes we chant in the morning, sometimes we chant in the evening, sometimes we chant in the afternoon. The mind is very active saying, hey, you don't have a pattern, so I can control you at different times. But if we fix our time, we fix the spot where we sit, we fix the activities before chanting, etc., then the mind automatically learns to pacify itself because it is seeing a pattern develop. The mind is trainable. That's the first point we want to make. The second is there anything which you can do as a ritual, like you mentioned, chanting Om and then drawing a deep breath so that you could focus the mind, etc. One other thing that you could do externally is you could offer Guru Puja to Srila Prabhupada. You could offer Tulasi Arati. You could offer Narasimha Arati. All of this would completely center us so that we could offer our japa in a very nice way, which is what we observe in a temple. Yeah? In a temple environment, there is Mangalarati. There is the first point which they do is the Samsara Dava prayers, which is basically aligning ourselves with the Guru, who is a servant of Krishna. Then there is Tulsi Puja. Then there is chanting. Yeah? So all of this is basically a sequence which is going to allow us to center ourselves. So what I'm saying is you can do both. You can follow a certain pattern of time, place, circumstance before you chant. You can also follow a process of doing things before you chant because it allows you to kind of control your mind. So I would lean more on the process that's been given in our system. Tulsi Puja, Guru Puja, etc. Okay, so I will clarify. Number one, if you close your eyes and it makes you comfortable, then please close your eyes. Okay? That's perfectly fine, because if that's what you want to do, because it's perfectly fine. Now, the second point is, what is it that you ought to do? the general process is we must focus our hearing of the mantra that we chant. This is Srila Prabhupada's recommendation. When we really concentrate and hear the mantra that is being chanted by us through our lips, then everything else falls into place. So when we are trying to focus on imagining Krishna's presence in our heart, like focusing on how Krishna appears, etc., while we chant, it is sometimes effective and sometimes it may not be, because depending on our concentration, we are able to do that and we may not be able to do that. What I have found effective in my personal practice is to basically hear. Follow the sound. Close your eyes and follow the sound. Focus on just hearing the sound. It will make a big, big difference in your japa. Sure. Any other question that... sorry? Yes. Yes, you could write on WhatsApp, please, to me, personally. Yeah. Well, basically, it's a process. As I said, the mind is trainable and you must focus on hearing. If you focus on hearing, then the process of coming in touch with Krishna and being able to, Krishna's names, and being able to pacify the mind and being able to subdue the mind will work. So if you make a big attempt to subdue the mind, then all the energy will go towards subduing the mind. Instead, put all your energy into hearing. Just try and hear. Put all your energy into it and you will find that you have greater success. Sure. Mm-hmm. Sure. Hare Krishna. Can you speak up a little bit, Lakshmi? Sorry, can you increase your volume? A little better, yeah, perhaps. See, it's considered to be producing problems because they come from the same family tree which goes back millions of years. Yeah? It's considered to be. But perhaps in the modern context, the connections themselves to the rishis is very, very limited. Do you get what I'm saying? It is very limited. Sorry? Yeah, in the modern context, it is quite limited because we don't really have daily practices of recognizing where we come from, etc. So there are no impressions in our chitta, in our consciousness, of saying, oh, I belong to this particular group. There isn't. So I think genealogically, this is basically how it used to be managed in the past. There is perhaps some validity even now, which we can't really prove. But at the same time, because we are so far away from all of this now in terms of our practices and what we do and what we don't do on a daily basis, it may not have as bad an impact as what we would think it would if we were closer to the tree. Yeah. Yes. If you can give me specific examples, we can look into it, Ravindra Prabhu. It's basically, yeah, see what I'm saying is if it's specific, then we can look into it. So if you can give me some specific examples, then I can comment on it. Yeah. Oh, you're just asking that, oh, everybody started out at the same time. I don't believe so, yeah? Because they basically, for example, they basically had the 7 rishis, the Sapta rishis, then they were considered to be the, I would say, the Prajapatis, etc., etc. So what I'm saying is that there seems to be some clear delineation of who these personalities are. But if there is any specific examples where it was a mix-up, then let me know and I'll probably comment on it. I can give you some comments. Yeah? Thank you. Anything else? No, it's not necessarily the same. Yeah, there can be different individuals play. Now, I don't have that answer, but I'm saying there are the post and the individual were 2 different people those days. Yeah. So, for example, in the same chapter, it is being said that one of the Adityas, Yama is also an Aditya in the sense that he is related to the sun. He is the son of sun god. One of the Adityas basically took over, Aryama took over when Yamaraj came as Vidura. Yeah? So obviously he was basically playing the role of Yamaraj, Dharmaraj. So there's a role which is to be played, and then the individual could be different. I don't have an answer. No, I don't have an answer to that. I don't. No. No problem. Yeah, it's as simple as that. And I was just wanting to say that time, even material time has a certain eternality to it because of the concept of being around for so long. So for example, if you and I were to have a conversation about time and I say 1,000,000 years, you would say, yeah, that's an eternity. So one can say it's an expression of simply the volume of years material time has existed, because material time has endlessly existed as far back as the material universe. Universes have been created, destroyed, etc., etc. Okay, so the material phenomenon had a beginning. So isn't that supposed to be a beginning and an end? So how could we call it eternal? It is eternal because in the context of where we are, it's almost an infinite sum in terms of the number of years. So it's very difficult to peg and say that infinity can be defined. Yeah. So in that sense, material time and the time factor of destroying and creation of material universes and the material universes being withdrawn, all of this concept is an eternal process as well. And then there is eternal time of an individual who basically does not experience any destruction. And that is the phenomenon of the spiritual sky. So Krishna basically does not experience destruction. There is no destruction in the spiritual sky. So there isn't a past state versus present versus future, because there really isn't a destruction, a process of destruction, because that is the distinction between spiritual time factor versus material time factor. Spiritual time factor, the destructive aspects of past, present, future is not present at all. It's not there. Material time factor, whatever is being created in the matter is going to get formed and deformed, etc. We all go back to the material elements, and then again there's a fresh creation of different kinds of bodies. So that's what we mean by the soul being eternal. because it can't be destroyed. The spiritual sky being eternal because it doesn't undergo modifications. Material universes being temporary because they go modifications. Material time being described as eternal time because of just the vast number of years of existence. So I think there's a little bit of, I would say, a bit of both. It is not as confusing if it were to be seen from the Sanskrit aspect of it. Sanskrit says Kala. Yeah? And when they use the word Kala, it is a feature of Krishna who appears as the time factor. This is absent in the spiritual sky. This feature of so-called Kala is absent in the spiritual sky because there is no destruction there. I hope this answered your question because we touched upon some different things. Sure. Hare Krishna. Okay, so if there aren't any more questions, then we can end today's session. We apologize for all the confusion about the sessions because there was some technical difficulty, and we would have overcome it this week, so we wouldn't have these issues in the subsequent week. So, thank you for participating. One last thing, I'm sorry. I think this is Ajay Govind Prabhu. He's asked me in a group chat, share how important is it to please share how important it is to act according to your nature and how we can find out about our dharma or nature. Our dharma or nature can be determined by basically determining the dharma of our nature, and basically acting according to our dharma can be seen by experience itself. Say for example, if we have a tendency or a proclivity or attraction towards simplicity, and we have attraction towards Shastras, then we are Brahmanical. And when I use the word simplicity, I'm talking about, someone is comfortable with a clean, simple, but austere arrangement of life. That is a Brahmanical arrangement. They are comfortable. They're okay if it is austere, clean, but it is very simple because it doesn't bother them and distract them from the actual goals of life. If someone has desires and they're very disturbed in terms of basically they have all kinds of desires to engage with the world, and they're wanting to engage with the world as it is seen now, and they are more comfortable in a complex arrangement of life, and they are very comfortable in that arrangement, then that person definitely is more passionate and can classify themselves in the Vaishya group. If they desire basically to act according to, for example, dharma, and they also have very good leadership skills, and this comes out quite naturally, we can make an observation that they are quite Kshatriya by nature as well. And you will also find that they are somewhat more righteous in certain ways in terms of observing things from the perspective of what is right and what is wrong, etc. Then finally, the Shudra consciousness, you can also observe it psychologically, where someone is very comfortable working for others, someone is very comfortable, and this is not humility, it is simply that there is no desire for leadership, there isn't a desire for making elaborate arrangements. They are very agitated if the arrangements of life become disturbed. So psychologically there's a lot of agitation. Oh, I can't pay my bills, I can't pay this, I can't pay that. Then they are very, very agitated if the arrangements of life become disturbed. Then they are Shudra by nature, and they'll be very comfortable working for others, very comfortable taking orders and doing this. So what I'm trying to say is that these are broad classifications, and psychological propensities can be seen, can be observed. What is important, however, is for us to basically look for an opportunity to be consistent and to be honest about our nature, and then we slowly execute Krishna consciousness based on that nature. So for example, even in the devotional setting, you might find devotees very attracted to simple service. You might find devotees very attracted to reading reading Shastra and preaching. You will find devotees who are attracted to administration, managing. You will find devotees who are distinctly attracted to money management in the temple. So, like fundraising, etc., etc. So, you will also find devotees who are absolutely upset when they are put into fundraising because they have no comfort with dealing with all this money. So, even in devotional service, you find these natures coming up. So, it's a matter of understanding what these are and what our propensities are, and then working towards basically adapting and living life according to this so that we don't get unnecessarily agitated. A very important verse is from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 8th canto, 2nd chapter, verse number 30 to 32. This is when Gajendra the elephant gets caught by the crocodile. Srila Prabhupada writes saying that the crocodile is getting stronger by the day because it's in its own natural environment. Gajendra the elephant, being unnaturally situated, is getting weaker by the day. So he is telling all the devotees, Srila Prabhupada is writing, that we should find what is our natural arrangement so that we don't become disturbed and become weaker. So that's a very good verse actually which talks about it. So recognizing this is not an issue. Acting according to it is also not an issue at all. But this is only so much so that it doesn't disturb us and we are able to move forward. Yeah? So we don't feel disturbed and we move forward. So understanding our nature is very important. If you're understanding that your nature is simple, you don't like complexity, or because complexity means passion. Complexity means passion. You don't like and you don't appreciate complexity, and you basically want to have a simple but austere life so that you could focus your energy on service, then understand that this is Brahmanical. So psychology can be understood this way. If your psychology is very disturbed, if there is ups and downs with eating and mating and sleeping arrangements, that is Shudra, because they can't live with all these disturbances to the basic necessities of life. Shudras have this propensity. If there's a natural desire to lead, there's a natural desire to basically lead others and be a part of leadership, then that is a Kshatriya quality, and the Kshatriya quality would also come up, so one can take on assignments that are somewhat leadership oriented. And then the Brahmanical quality we already spoke of, and the Vaishya quality we spoke of. What is very important for us to understand is that these are vehicles. This is not a destination. And these qualities can modify themselves as we get more and more purified. And it's really not, I would say, fixed, especially in the modern age, simply because, we generally are not following the profession of our forefathers. If you're born in a Brahmanical family, are you following the profession of a priest? If you're born in a Kshatriya family, are you following the profession of joining the army? Are you, leading a business house if basically you're born to a business family? These days, people seem to be doing a bit of both, and they're all over the place. So it's important just to understand our psychological arrangement. If you do not like complexity and are attracted to Shastra, understand the psychological arrangement which is being offered to us is Brahmanical. I think that's a better way to put it. Okay, so if there isn't anything else, I'm going to end here, and we will continue again in the following week. Thank you so much for participating. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai.